In the grand theater of human behavior, Machiavelli understood one truth above all: power does not belong to the kind, nor the strong, but to those who control the limits of others. A man's true strength lies not in the battles he wins, but in the boundaries he enforces. To tolerate the intolerable is to surrender one's kingdom brick by brick, until he stands as a ruler without a throne. This is the silent decay of many men. They do not lose power because a woman took it. They lose it because they gave it away willingly, disguised as patience or love. Every man believes himself capable of endurance. He endures disrespect, excuses manipulation, and explains away betrayal under the illusion that love can conquer all. But in the eyes of Machiavelli, endurance without enforcement is not a virtue, it is submission. Power demands restraint, and restraint demands recognition of your limits. A man who cannot define his limits is not a man of strength but a servant to his own weakness. To rule his life, he must first rule his boundaries. When a woman observes that your patience outweighs your self-respect, she begins to test your resolve. It starts subtly. A small insult masked as a joke, a delay in response, a disregard for your opinion. And each time you allow it, you tell her what she is allowed to do next. This is the natural law of power. What is permitted once will be repeated, and what is repeated will become her habit. In Machiavelli's world, habits define loyalty, and loyalty defines control. Once your boundaries blur, so too does your authority. A Machiavellian man does not shout to assert dominance. He enforces his standards with quiet, unwavering certainty. He understands that a kingdom without rules becomes a playground for rebellion. The moment you allow a woman to step beyond what you silently disapprove, you crown her as ruler of your emotions. Your word, your decisions, your peace, all become hostage to her moods. Power is not lost in one grand act of defiance. It is stolen in increments, through your silence and tolerance. A woman will always test the man she is with. This is not malice, it is instinct. She seeks to know whether your strength is genuine or merely performed. When she senses that your boundaries are negotiable, she loses respect long before she loses attraction. Machiavelli would say that a prince who cannot command respect will soon be overthrown, not by his enemies, but by those closest to his throne. So too, a man who cannot enforce his emotional laws will find himself ruled by the very person he sought to love. Boundaries are not walls, they are gates, and every gate must be guarded. A wise man opens them to trust but closes them to transgression. When you say no without fear, when you walk away without apology, when you refuse what offends your values, you display the highest form of strength, self-governance. Machiavelli saw this not as cruelty, but as the discipline required to maintain order. For love without order becomes chaos, and chaos breeds contempt. Modern men often confuse kindness with weakness. They believe that to be loved, they must be endlessly understanding, endlessly forgiving. But women, even unconsciously, do not love what they can manipulate. They love what they must rise to meet. To establish power through boundaries is not to build distance. It is to define respect. The man who does not define how he should be treated teaches others that he can be treated in any way. The Machiavellian principle of control lies in perception. If you tolerate disrespect, you project need. If you permit manipulation, you reveal dependency. But when you enforce standards calmly, without emotion or anger, you project strength, and strength commands admiration. Women, like all people, are drawn to certainty. A man without boundaries is uncertain, and uncertainty breeds instability. When a man fails to draw the line, his world begins to erode quietly. He becomes reactive, emotional, desperate for validation. He begins to negotiate with disrespect, thinking he can fix it with more effort or love. But Machiavelli's wisdom cuts through such delusions. Power is never negotiated, it is asserted. Every relationship, romantic or political, thrives on balance. The moment your boundaries collapse, the balance shifts irreversibly. Power through boundaries is not about control over others, it is control over yourself. It is the awareness that peace cannot exist without law, and love cannot survive without respect. Machiavelli would remind us that the prince who allows rebellion within his gates is soon dethroned by his own mercy. So must a man guard his inner kingdom, not with cruelty, but with clarity. His silence should carry consequence, his standards should carry weight, and his limits should be absolute in their enforcement. For it is not the storms outside that destroy a kingdom, the weakness that grows when its ruler forgets where his borders begin. In the writings of Machiavelli, one of the most dangerous illusions is the belief that deception always arrives with malice. Often, it wears the face of affection. The mask of manipulation is not an act of open war, but a quiet infiltration, a slow rewriting of your perception until you cannot tell whether her sweetness is sincerity or strategy. Women of subtle intelligence understand the art of influence far better than men who seek to control through force. They know that a smile disarms faster than a sword, and that emotion, when skillfully wielded, can turn even the strongest man into a willing servant of his own downfall. Machiavelli would observe that no ruler falls because of his enemies alone. He falls because he failed to see the hidden motives of those who claimed loyalty. So it is with men who are ensnared by charm. A woman who understands emotional leverage does not demand authority. She creates the illusion that you are still in control, even as she directs every outcome. She cloaks her ambitions in gentleness, her demands in suggestion, and her criticism in care. This is the art of manipulation, to command without appearing to command, to gain compliance through confusion rather than confrontation. Most men believe manipulation is easy to spot, raised voices, tears, or guilt. But true manipulation is quiet, polite, and rational. It does not provoke, it persuades. It begins when a woman learns what motivates you, your need to be respected, your desire to protect, your hunger for approval, and uses those very strengths to guide your decisions. She will appeal to your pride when she needs obedience, to your empathy when she needs forgiveness, and to your loneliness when she needs your silence. In every move, she studies your reactions and learns which strings to pull for the desired result. Machiavelli would have admired such cunning, for he wrote that those who rule must understand the nature of others to govern them effectively. Yet he also warned that the wise ruler must never allow emotion to cloud judgment. The moment you trust appearances, you surrender discernment. The moment you ignore your intuition, you give power to another's design. A woman skilled in manipulation thrives on your blindness. She hides her ambitions beneath layers of affection, ensuring that even her self-interest looks like devotion. Her greatest power is that you believe she has none. Manipulation thrives in the absence of awareness. It feeds on your need to keep peace, to avoid conflict, to prove loyalty. A Machiavellian man must see through this veil. He must question not just the words she speaks, but the purpose they serve. When she flatters, what does she want? When she withdraws, what does she hope to gain? When she apologizes, what consequence does she seek to avoid? Every action, however innocent it may appear, carries intention, and intention is the language of power. Many men become victims of manipulation not because they are weak, but because they are emotionally generous. They want to believe in goodness, to preserve harmony, to feel needed. Yet Machiavelli would remind them that belief without observation is folly. The world does not reward naivety, it consumes it. The moment you assume purity of motive in another, you make yourself vulnerable to control. The Machiavellian man does not hate those who manipulate. He simply refuses to play the unaware participant. He learns to see through the mask without tearing it away. In every interaction, manipulation tests one truth: who controls perception. The woman who can shape how you see her, how you see yourself, and how you see the relationship holds the power. She may not shout commands, but her silence becomes law. She may not demand change, but her approval becomes the condition of your peace. Slowly, your sense of self begins to orbit her reactions. This is how empires fall, not through conquest, but through influence. Machiavelli warned that when one surrenders perception, one surrenders sovereignty. The mask of manipulation is often beautiful. It appeals to your desire for connection and admiration. But beneath every sweet gesture lies calculation. It is not always malicious. Sometimes it is instinctive. Yet its effect is the same: it redirects your power. The more you try to please her, the more her approval becomes your measure of worth. She becomes the arbiter of your emotions, and you, the instrument of her will. In such a state, even your love becomes obedience disguised as devotion. To the Machiavellian mind, the only defense against manipulation is awareness sharpened by detachment. A man must observe patterns, not words, outcomes, not promises. He must value consistency over charm, boundaries over beauty. The manipulator cannot exist where perception is disciplined, for her power depends on confusion. When a man ceases to react emotionally and begins to analyze strategically, the mask begins to crack. It is not through confrontation that he defeats manipulation, but through the quiet, unwavering presence of clarity. Machiavelli knew that every relationship mirrors a political alliance. Each side seeks advantage. Each side tests limits. To pretend otherwise is to walk blind into a negotiation where only one side knows the terms. The wise man does not fear cunning. He studies it. He does not despise the manipulator. He learns from her. For in the end, those who wear masks only fear those who can see without them. In the court of human relationships, no weapon cuts deeper than emotion. Machiavelli understood that wars are not always fought with armies. Some are fought in whispers, in tears, in silence. Emotional leverage is the art of control disguised as vulnerability, and few wield it as effectively as those who understand the rhythm of human empathy. Where logic builds boundaries, emotion erodes them. A man may fortify his mind with reason, but one moment of emotional surrender can dismantle years of discipline. To those who seek influence, emotions are not expressions. They are instruments. In the Machiavellian sense, emotion is not to be feared, but understood. Every tear, every sigh, every accusation carries intent, whether conscious or instinctive. Women, by nature or experience, often learn that emotion compels faster than argument. Terror evokes protection faster than a command can demand it. A look of disappointment pierces deeper than any insult could. And thus, many men find themselves trapped, not by force, but by compassion. They mistake emotion for truth, and in that mistake, they surrender their power. Machiavelli once observed that men are more easily governed by their passions than by reason, for passion clouds judgment while giving the illusion of sincerity. The woman who understands this holds a subtle advantage. She does not need to dictate your actions. She only needs to influence how you feel about them. Once she can shape your emotions, your decisions follow naturally. She may use sadness to summon your sympathy, anger to provoke your guilt, or affection to lull your vigilance. Each reaction is a thread, and with enough threads, she weaves control. The tragedy of most men is not that they are emotional, but that they are emotionally untrained. They believe that to feel deeply is a virtue, yet Machiavelli would argue that emotion without awareness is weakness. The wise man does not suppress his feelings. He studies them. He learns to recognize when guilt is being weaponized, when affection is conditional, when tears are timed too precisely. Emotional leverage depends on predictability. If you can be provoked, you can be controlled. The man who learns to remain composed under emotional fire becomes untouchable. Consider how often a man apologizes, not because he is wrong, but because he cannot endure emotional discomfort. A woman withdraws affection, and suddenly he bends to restore it. She expresses sadness, and he changes his stance to avoid being the cause. This is the essence of emotional leverage. You adjust your behavior not by choice, but by compulsion. Machiavelli would compare this to a ruler who fears rebellion, and thus gives in to the people's cries, believing peace can be purchased by surrender. But every concession becomes an expectation, and every expectation, once met, becomes the new standard of control. Emotional leverage is also built on timing. It appears when you are most vulnerable, after conflict, after intimacy, after failure. When your defenses are lowered, when you crave understanding, that is when influence takes root. The Machiavellian man anticipates this moment. He does not deny his need for connection, but remains aware of how it can be used against him. For to control emotion is to control energy, and the man who guards his energy guards his power. The woman who understands emotional leverage rarely demands authority outright. She lets you offer it voluntarily. She may position herself as the victim, the misunderstood partner, or the one who loves more deeply. Her vulnerability becomes a mirror in which you see your guilt. You begin to feel responsible for her moods, her happiness, even her self-worth. But Machiavelli would remind you that no ruler can maintain order if he must constantly appease the emotions of his subjects. To rule effectively, one must learn when to comfort and when to remain unmoved. Compassion without control becomes servitude. In every act of emotional manipulation, the underlying principle remains the same: the control of reaction. The manipulator studies which emotions yield results and repeats them. Anger that provokes fear, sadness that wins forgiveness, affection that erases accountability. These are the tools of psychological strategy. The man who does not recognize them becomes enslaved by his own empathy. He begins to equate love with sacrifice and loyalty with surrender. Yet Machiavelli would say that love built on emotional dependency is not love at all. It is domination wrapped in tenderness. To master emotional leverage, one must understand its dual nature. It can destroy or protect. A disciplined man uses emotional awareness as a defense, not as a weapon. He listens without absorbing, observes without reacting, and acts only when his reasoning is clear. Emotion ceases to be a trap when you detach your identity from it. Machiavelli's prince learned to appear compassionate without being ruled by compassion, to seem understanding without forfeiting command. Likewise, a man must learn to acknowledge a woman's feelings without becoming a prisoner to them. Emotional leverage thrives where clarity is absent. The more confused you are about your emotional boundaries, the easier it becomes for others to dictate your responses. The Machiavellian man cultivates calm, not coldness. He observes, he reflects, and he decides. Never under pressure, never under guilt. To be unmoved does not mean to be unfeeling. It means to choose your feelings with precision. In a world where emotions are currency, the one who remains sovereign over his own is the one who never falls to the illusions of another. In the philosophy of Machiavelli, respect is not a gift bestowed upon the deserving. It is a consequence extracted through presence, authority, and consequence. To demand respect is to confess that you lack it. A man who understands power never asks to be respected. He ensures that his behavior, his discipline, and his composure make disrespect impossible. In the arena of relationships, respect is the invisible throne upon which love must sit. Without it, affection becomes mockery and devotion becomes dependence. The man who tolerates disrespect in any form, whether through tone, silence, or action, invites rebellion within his own kingdom. Machiavelli observed that subjects do not fear a weak ruler, nor do they truly love him. They exploit him. In the same way, when a woman senses that a man will tolerate insolence, she ceases to view him as a figure of stability and begins to see him as a resource of convenience. The balance shifts quietly. Her admiration fades, replaced by curiosity. How far can she push before he reacts? Every test of boundaries is not just a measure of power, it is a question of respect. If your reaction is timid or apologetic, you answer that question without words. You reveal that your principles are negotiable, your dignity conditional. Respect in the Machiavellian sense is not built on fear, but on the certainty of consequence. It is not the raised voice or angry threat that commands it, but the silent, unyielding enforcement of standards. When a man establishes what is acceptable and lives by those laws himself, he becomes his own sovereign. He does not control through intimidation, but through integrity. Machiavelli would argue that to rule others, one must first rule himself. A man who lacks self-command invites disorder. A woman will not respect a man who has no control over his impulses, emotions, or desires, for she instinctively understands that such a man cannot protect, cannot lead, and cannot be trusted with power. Modern culture often teaches men to confuse affection with acceptance. They are told that to love deeply means to forgive endlessly, that patience is the highest virtue, that to walk away is cruel. Yet Machiavelli would see through this deception. Endless tolerance breeds contempt, not closeness. The man who forgives every offense without consequence teaches the offender that his forgiveness is meaningless. A ruler who never punishes disobedience loses authority. Likewise, a man who never withdraws respect or presence in the face of disrespect becomes invisible. Respect must be mutual, but it begins with self-respect, and self-respect demands that you never trade your dignity for peace. When a woman respects a man, it is not because he dominates her, it is because she recognizes that his world is laws. His time, his attention, his affection. These are privileges, not guarantees. She knows that if she crosses the line, there will be no anger, no argument, just distance. That silence is power. Machiavelli would liken it to a ruler who does not need to shout to be obeyed. His reputation speaks in his absence. The man who must explain why he deserves respect already stands below the one he addresses. The erosion of respect often begins subtly. A sarcastic comment ignored, a boundary crossed without consequence, a promise broken and forgiven too easily. Each moment chips away at authority. Soon, The relationship becomes a negotiation of emotion rather than a structure of principle. She tests, he pleads, and the balance of power collapses under the weight of unspoken resentment. Machiavelli understood that respect is not sustained by emotion, but by order. Love may fluctuate, but respect must remain constant, for it is the pillar that holds the structure upright. To the Machiavellian mind, respect is a transaction of value. You do not receive it by asking, you receive it by embodying strength, clarity, and composure. The man who acts out of insecurity, who seeks validation through approval, devalues himself in the exchange. A woman may comfort him, she will not admire him. Admiration comes from certainty, from the quiet assurance that you will never betray your principles to please another. To command respect, a man must be willing to lose everything that depends on its absence. Respect also demands consistency. If a man enforces standards one day and abandons them the next, he teaches inconsistency as law. A ruler who enforces discipline selectively is soon ignored. Similarly, a man who excuses disrespect based on mood, attraction, or circumstance undermines his own credibility. Machiavelli would call this the downfall of many rulers. They mistake emotion for judgment. The wise man does not react from pride, nor from pain, but from principle. He does not seek revenge for insult, he merely removes himself from its reach. The illusion of modern romance often suggests that love should conquer pride, that humility should override ego. But in truth, love without respect is merely dependency wearing the mask of devotion. The man who demands respect through force gains compliance, not loyalty. The man who earns it through integrity gains both. Machiavelli would advise such a man to treat respect as a fortress, to build it strong, maintain it with vigilance, and never allow pity or passion to weaken its walls. A woman who truly respects a man will guard his honor as she guards her own.